Hello, welcome back to another episode. Before we start, I'd like to say that the views in this podcast are those of our own and not those of the Department of Defense, the Department of the Air Force, Space Force, or any of the units either one of us is affiliated with. But with that stated, Lieutenant Lee, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay. Hello, I'm Lieutenant Cameron Lee. I am 25 years old in Delta 9, the Orbital Warfare Delta, and I'm in the training squadron currently. Formerly, I was a space operator in OneSops. I'm married and I have a puppy named Mochi. She's a Labrador, and she often gets me out and about and encourages my fitness because she's always wanting to go get her energy out.
It's definitely a good part about having dogs.
Yes.
100%. 100%. See, that's since my wife and I have 5 dogs. So yeah, one gets you going, but just imagine 5 working breed dogs as well. That's a load to bear for sure.
Dang.
So yeah, we're walking all the time. Sometimes, in full admittance, we literally have to walk our dogs in 2 shifts because 5 dogs at once can be a little bit much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. Yeah.
Sometimes I ride my bike with my dog, like on a leash.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking of having like 5 dogs on a bike. It would be kind of crazy.
I have a Belgian Malinois, and so having my dog on a leash with a bike just doesn't sound like it's a good time.
Yeah.
I would be way too scared. Yeah. He's too strong.
Definitely wear a helmet.
Yeah, 100%. But okay, so with that, tell us a little bit more about your journey to join the Space Force. How'd you commission? What got you to being where you're at? Stationed here today.
Totally, yeah. So I graduated from the Air Force Academy, the first class that was commissioning officers directly into the Space Force. So we had the option to select different AFSCs. I had chosen space, went back when it was, space was part of the Air Force. And I chose space because I knew that with the Space Force coming and just with the way that warfare is changing, that space would be a new and exciting field. Yeah. I joined the Air Force Academy because I feel a responsibility to give back to the nation. The nation has given me and my family a lot. Yeah. And I ultimately really wanted to lead. And I thought, what better place to lead than an organization that has basically nothing?
Sure.
An organization that needs to stand up and create its own identity and its culture is just really needing leaders.
Yeah.
I also find space, even though it's very technical, to be equally poetic.
Okay.
It really draws people in because of this curiosity about what could exist beyond. So beyond the technical, I really think there's this soulful quest to understand what the world is like. So yeah. I think space kind of drew me for a multitude of reasons.
Did you know that when you were entering into the Air Force Academy that you were going to select space as the destination?
Absolutely not. No, okay. I had no idea.
Okay. What drove you there?
To space or gosh. Just the newness, I think, of the force.
Sure.
It was just an opportunity to create.
Yeah.
Whereas other areas of the Air Force are better established.
Sure. What year of Air Force Academy is that? Do you establish that sort of thing? Or when did you start to hear about space? And then when do you make that decision for what you're going to branch?
Yeah, so you make that decision your junior year, basically. Okay. Now they have actual programs so that when you start as a freshman or a sophomore, you can learn a little bit about the Space Force, and they have cohorts to teach you about the Space Force.
Right.
But before we didn't have a Space Force, so there wasn't really a need for that.
That makes sense. Okay. Yeah. Cool. So, tell us a little bit more about what you've gone through with your own fitness journey, right? This is kind of obviously the whole point of the podcast, right? Is to talk about, being healthy in the Space Force, right? So tell us a little bit more about what fitness looked like maybe before the Air Force Academy, and then once you got to the Academy, and then sort of where sort of in that journey did you start to become really passionate about health and fitness?
Yeah. I love that you call it a journey because you never really reach your destination, and it is just constantly changing.
Yeah.
I even feel like sometimes on a month-to-month basis, your goals and the way that you take this fitness journey is changing.
Yeah.
But let me think. So in high school, just standard did like sports and things like that.
Sure.
Then at the Air Force Academy, they also had intramurals and fitness tests, but a little bit more pressed with military demands and academic demands.
Sure.
Um, I started doing a little bit of lifting at the academy, but I would say I didn't really start to appreciate fitness for fitness's sake until I emerged as a fully active duty member.
Sure.
I joined a CrossFit gym in 2020.
Yeah.
COVID year. I found a lot of community there, and I loved how CrossFit just pushed me to the edge like every single day.
Yeah.
Which I found to be a little bit different than just when I go to the gym, and everybody has something different. I can't get my husband to enjoy CrossFit. He just doesn't like it. So,
Sure.
but I loved CrossFit 2020.
Yeah.
And I have continued to find new gyms with each city that I moved to.
Yeah.
Aside from CrossFit, I've always been a runner. I ran the Air Force half marathon last year.
Nice.
It was just a great time to meet other people, other runners.
Mm-hmm.
They come from all over the world. They
Right.
will pay people who are stationed Oconus
Yeah.
to come and run this marathon. So I encourage everyone to try and do that. You don't have to be fast. That's also a misperception.
Yeah.
And
misperception for a lot of competitions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Coming from someone who's done a lot of competitions myself, you certainly don't have to be a certain level of strength threshold, to compete in powerlifting, or certain, threshold of speed to compete in your local 5K. Like, no one cares. No one's like really analyzing your performance except for you against yourself and your own previous performances, right? And where you want to go in the future. I think that's a really important piece to kind of bring up. Like, one of the ways that I kind of stay motivated in my own fitness journey is, to sign up for that next event. Whether that might be the same event multiple times, across a year or 2 years or whatever it might be, but, kind of comparing that against like previous performances in my own life, right? Like, stacking up myself up against myself. And I think that always keeps me kind of tried and true and honest to my own sort of like pushing myself and like, being intense in my own training journey, right? And like really trying to strive to be, the best versions of myself because I know I have more left to give.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So, you talked a little bit about, before we started recording, sort of how you found CrossFit. I'd be really interested to, learn a little bit more about like what sort of kind of got you into that gym the first day. Like, what made you look up, CrossFit on Google Maps and be like, I'm going to go there on this day,
Yeah. I think that for me, going to the gym, like, just as an individual with my headphones on, I knew that I wasn't getting what I needed from my workouts.
Mm-hmm.
I was getting like my muscles were getting tired, but I wasn't pushing myself as hard as I could. And then, people at the gym don't really like want to talk.
Sure.
And I get that. Like, I don't want to talk either. You just have your resting workout face.
Right.
I really don't want to talk.
Yeah.
But I really did want to talk to people.
Sure.
Like, I wanted to work with other, with sports, right? Like, you always show up and you're with the team and you're working out, but even if you're not talking to the other person, like, you're in it together.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that part of CrossFit. I also saw them. They have like an outdoor portion of the gym.
Sure.
They're like flipping tires and doing cool stuff. And I was like, I should try that.
Fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What made you stay then? A lot of people can go to the gym the first day maybe, or a lot of people can start a workout program. What made you want to like stay in that training pipeline?
Oh yeah, I loved it. I mean, I would go every day. Like, a day without CrossFit, I like, wouldn't sleep as well, or I'd feel kind of antsy.
Yeah.
If there was nothing that was pulling me away ever.
I'm sure a lot of people maybe feel intimidated, whether that's going to a CrossFit gym or a powerlifting gym or just their local, like, sort of, whatever gym closest to them that makes the most sense for their own journey, even a military gym, on their installation.
Yeah.
What do you think, would you try to like emphasize to anybody that was struggling to get into the gym for the first time, or, start to go to the gym and create that as a habit? Like, have you ever seen anybody, be judged or be turned away or like, be shunned in any way? Like,
never, ever.
Okay.
I get it though. It is scary to step into a new gym.
Yeah.
It's always nice to find a friend
Mm-hmm.
who's maybe trying that gym. like I wanted to try Olympic weightlifting.
Sure.
So I found a friend who was in that gym, and then like we could show up together on the
Right.
first day. So even if you're both of you are new, you're new together.
Yeah.
But no, heavens no, I've never had anybody um, be like shunned or like, oh, you're not good at this. It's
Right.
like that's part of the community is that we're all trying to grow,
Yeah.
help each other out.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I've been to a lot of different military installations myself, through my career and whatnot. But um, every military gym I've ever been to, as well, has a similar atmosphere where, like, I'm sure a lot of people probably come up to you in the gym and maybe ask you questions, or maybe ask you to be their spotter, or maybe ask like, what's gotten you, as fit as you are. Or I'm trying to be like you, right? In that way, have you ever like sort of emphasize to that person, like, hey, I'm here to help no matter what, right? Like, whenever someone approaches me, I very much encourage them, like, hey, like, this is always, people are an open book. Like, you should definitely approach that person and ask that question,
Hmm.
because a lot of times that person will give you more advice than you're even going to ask for in the first place. Have you kind of experienced something similar?
Yeah, that's so true. Like, actually, one of the people I'm thinking of right now, like, they were actually a CrossFit coach, like a certified CrossFit coach. Like, hey,
Yeah,
like, I got a couple tips. And I was like, that's
sure.
amazing.
Yeah,
That's so cool. Um, I do. I wish more people kind of would help each other out in the gym, but I think it's kind of intimidating.
sure. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely makes sense, but that is one thing about like going to a different atmosphere, sort of like, maybe trying out a different gym, or like even hiring a trainer for like, a couple sessions, just to get the sort of, habit established and sort of
Hmm.
get some routine established, and then that at least that one person,
Yeah,
even if that is one of the trainers, that's okay. But like, at least that one person. It feels like a more familiar environment. Maybe they show you around, and like, they kind of get you comfortable with the gym like experience, and
yep,
then they can go about like kind of, blossoming in their own way, even after that, because they feel more comfortable with that experience then, right?
for sure.
Okay. So tell us a little bit more about then, what's kind of kept you progressing with that journey, as you've transitioned into, being active duty in the Space Force. Like, what have you done since you've been in Colorado? Like, what do you still like to do for your fitness?
Yeah. So I still enjoy CrossFit a
Sure.
lot. I do hot yoga. I try to do it once a week, and I do that. It's like a little bit different from my CrossFit goals.
Sure.
It's a little bit more personal, a little bit more mental,
Mm-hmm.
like trying to take a deep breath before I start my week and make sure that my next week I'm set up and I'm moving toward my ultimate goals.
Yeah.
I'm not just kind of like going through the motions. So I see yoga as fitness, and obviously you're sweating and you're burning a ton of calories, but I see it as a little bit more than just like the physical fitness. And and I think once a week is a good tempo for me. CrossFit, I have had a bar muscle up on my goals list
Sure.
for like a year.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it's important to have fitness goals. Sometimes in adulthood, it's a little bit more difficult to establish those, like if you don't have like a race or a competition
Right.
coming up. Um, and for me too, like I don't like to put a certain weight onto it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel good about my weight and my strength, and like I'm cheering myself on. Like, you're the best. Like, you don't need to reach a certain weight target.
Sure.
Um, I just want to come in and get a little bit better each day, and make sure I'm getting that stress relief and that sweat
Mm-hmm.
and pushing myself to the limit. Um, and sometimes that limit will change. Sometimes I'll have a capacity to do more,
Right.
or maybe less. I'm tired, but sometimes just getting to the gym 5 times a week is like that's the goal.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. We'll definitely talk about that. And it kind of segues really well into like what we kind of talk about from that first transition. So, you sat through that essentially health and wellness course that I deliver, right?
mhm.
In that course, I talk about the 5 factors of health, right? The 5 factors of health, again, getting it from Ben Bergeron, actually CrossFit coach. We talk about how we move, how we eat, how we recover, how we think, and then how we connect with others. We've pretty much talked about like at least 4 of those categories now. So tell us, a little bit more about like the movement aspect. We've talked about sort of, getting to the gym, being consistent, and then like sometimes the goal is just getting to the gym, and then having some goals and stuff. Like, how else outside of the gym do you emphasize like that movement bucket? If we were going to look at that movement bucket first, like what else do you find important in your daily life or in your weekly life, to try to emphasize within that movement component?
Yeah. So I do a lot of sitting during the day.
Sure.
Um, I have a acquaintance, like a mentor, and we go on productivity walks. It's a new term going
Yeah.
around Schriever. I'm gonna just
Good.
keep spreading it.
Yeah, I like it.
So yeah, we take a walk just around the base. Usually doesn't take any more than 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Only do it once a day. Sometimes it's hard to find time that works for both
Right.
of us, but it's good, right? Like we talk about, you get the social element.
Yep.
You're just chatting about your day, maybe a little bit of work, maybe a little bit of life, and then you're just moving and you're also seeing the sun, which
Right.
sometimes you can forget exists.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I emphasize that a lot. I literally just gave a brief like last 2 weeks ago about self-care and how like much the sun in the middle of the day can do for you, and
Yeah.
especially walking meetings. Like walking meetings are a great way
Oh
to
yeah.
stimulate the thought processes, actually increase our focus, increase our cognitive attention, and a lot of other like really beneficial aspects. Not even including the movement component.
Right.
Like I think that really is a great way. So like, do you have a standing desk, or do you not have access to one?
So I don't have a standing desk at work,
Okay.
but sometimes I'll just put like a bunch of books under my laptop.
Sure.
So yes, I do
Make your
have a
own.
standing
Yeah.
desk.
Yeah. I've done. I mean, back in the day, I definitely have used an Amazon Prime box to put underneath my laptop
Oh
for
yeah.
my schoolwork. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
for
Whatever
sure.
works.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So taking walking sort of meetings or like breaks throughout the day is important. Like, what else do you do? You talk about like walking your dog. Like,
Oh yeah.
what else do you do to throughout the week like stimulate more movement?
Yeah, so I'll walk my dog in the morning before work and then also after work. And that's really, there's a book. I know. It's called the 5 a.m. Club.
Sure.
And one of its many tenets is the second wind workout.
Mm-hmm.
So there's usually this plateau in the middle of the day where people are like, man, I'm tired. Like you
Mm-hmm.
just worked the whole day. You're just kind of coasting to dinner and into the evening.
Yeah.
And the whole idea is if you just like kind of get up and move a little bit, if it's a walk or a run or something really short and quick, nothing that like would make you sweat and need to take a shower or anything like
Sure.
that like it would stimulate your brain, your productivity would increase, things like that. So
Yeah.
after work, quick walk for Mochi because she needs it and I probably need it more than she does.
Yeah.
Second wind workout.
For sure. I like it. It's an interesting one. I won't go super like far down that rabbit hole, but one of the things I'll talk about in some of the classes that I give as well is the importance potentially of delaying caffeine first thing in the morning, because that's actually a massive sort of secondary driver for that middle of the day, like sort of like 1 p.m., 2 p.m. crash.
Yeah.
Is whenever we have caffeine within the first like 60 minutes of waking up and we're not following that with a workout, it kind of like makes us really fatigued in the middle of the day. We'll kind of like crash in mid-afternoon, right? And then to go along with that, if we looked at like it's called like a circadian rhythm across the day, right? Which is like responsible for us like having high quality sleep at night, like getting up in the morning, like, kind of having a routine. So our body's like internal clock. It also shows really clearly that dip in the middle afternoon. So if we kind of like layer both of those on and people wake up first thing in the morning, I have to have my coffee. It's like, okay, well, if you're also having coffee there first thing in the morning and your circadian rhythm is already primed to be lower in the middle of the afternoon, well, it's kind of like double dip of like, oh crap, So certainly that can be a huge driver and help a lot. One of the ways that we could also talk about that, and one of the things I've seen successful people is directly after lunch, taking about a 5 to 10 minute walk as well. Because then that's also sort of like stimulating metabolism and helping you digest your food a little bit better and helping you also wake back up, right? Because a lot of people will eat lunch and then get really tired and then fall asleep at their desk, right? Or fall asleep in a meeting or whatever it is, right? So doing a 5 to 10 minute walk, leaving the lunch table a little bit earlier, right? Instead of casually talking for that 5 minutes or 10 minutes, go for that middle of the day walk, right? Yeah, and then that would be another great way to like insert that in there. Yeah.
So do you recommend having coffee if you absolutely must?
Sure.
Like a couple hours after you wake up?
It doesn't need to be a couple hours per se, but like if you can delay it outwards of, let's say, 30, 45, 60 minutes, up to like 60 minutes is pretty daggone good. We don't have to get into the physiological mechanisms of it, but yeah, I'd like to see if you're gonna not train first thing in the morning, right? Because then we get to talk about the physiological benefits of caffeine for working out. But if we're just gonna get up and like go to work or get up and do schoolwork, right, or whatever it might be early in the morning, yeah, I think it would be definitely in your best interest, based off of a lot of research on caffeine, to delay that 45 to 75 minutes or so after you woke up would be a good idea. Yeah.
Cool.
Hopefully that's new knowledge, but yeah. So I think that's definitely important. And then, okay, so that kind of like covers the movement bucket. So we've talked a little bit about the recovery piece. Let's go a little bit further into the recovery piece element of it, because the thing I emphasize with the recovery piece is that it's not just physical, it's also mental,
Mm.
right? And a large portion of that bucket of recovery is sleep, of course. But at the same time, we also need to think about our physical and mental recovery from things like work or things like social engagements or things, like whatever we might be doing, right? Like it might be really taxing for somebody, let's say going into a new environment, going into the gym, right? Maybe they're kind of introverted and they don't really feel super comfortable going into a new environment. And then they go into that new environment and they feel exhausted,
Mm.
not even from the workout, but like socially exhausted and mentally exhausted,
Mm-hmm.
right? What do you emphasize, personally for your own recovery, whether that be physical or mental, or how do you manage sort of like your sleep?
Mm.
You can kind of, yeah, you can
Yeah,
split that
that was,
up.
that was
Yeah,
that was good. That was a good question. So first of all, I love the watches for the sleep. It's been a lot easier for me to track the quality of my sleep and make
sure.
sure that I'm going to bed and waking up at the same time or similar times. For sleep, just I am a huge proponent of good sleep hygiene. So like no cell phones in the bedroom.
Hmm.
I'll read before bed, but only like a physical book.
Sure.
Um, just like a wind down routine, sort of.
Yeah.
Um, I also love a good bath before bed.
Sure.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
For physical recovery, I'll do yoga at my house. Yoga with Adriene is a really awesome
Okay.
YouTube channel.
Sure.
Um, I like to do a little bit of yoga in the morning. It kind of goes back to movement.
Yeah.
But and then I also have one of those. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's like a big cane that has like a bunch of like sticks coming
Yeah.
out
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
it.
For mobility.
Yeah,
Sure.
just kind of like myofascial release sort of.
Yeah.
I do that at night.
Yeah.
Um, and for me, yoga too is a form of meditation. So
Sure.
that helps me kind of release some of my stressors from the day.
Sure.
Um,
Do you
uh,
treat it like meditation in terms of like the way you approach it mentally?
Definitely.
How do you do something like, is that like deliberate thoughts inside your head? Are you doing like breathing, like breath work practices, or what do you do for that?
Yeah, it's breath. It's just breathing, like inhale, exhale with certain movements of your body.
Mm-hmm.
And then I always do like just nose, so into the nose, out through the nose,
Mm-hmm.
deep, like from your throat, almost
Sure.
breathing, and that requires focus. So
Sure.
it's good.
Yeah. That makes sense. Okay. So that good for mental and physical recovery, of course. Do you do anything, like, are you ever like overly stressed when you get out of work, and then do you do anything deliberately, let's say after work, to kind of like transition into sort of what you're going to do in that evening?
Mm, so since out at Schriever, we're in the middle of nowhere. It's usually the
Sure.
drive that's a compression for me, or
Sure.
decompression, just music,
Yeah.
or I'll call my mom and chat with her on the phone on the way home.
Sure.
And then usually by the time I get to the driveway, sometimes I'll sit there for a second. Okay, deep breath, like transitioning away from work now.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
that drive is usually enough.
That makes sense. Okay. Cool. When we look at how you manage sleep, of course, being in the squadron you're currently in versus the one you previously in, you're not doing a lot of shift work right now, but tell me a little bit. So before we get into shift work, tell me a little bit more about like sort of how you manage your sleep while you're not on shift work. Like, you talked a lot about like, kind of winding down before bed,
Mm-hmm.
doing some recovery aspects before bed as well, reading a book, like keeping the phones in the bedroom, like all great, fantastic stuff. Do you do anything else to control for, your quality or quantity or your consistency of sleep?
Hmm.
You have a set bedtime every day?
So I have a set bedtime frame. I
Sure.
don't believe in such rigidity that's like it's
Sure.
a certain time. But yeah, I shoot for like to start the wind down at about 9:30
Sure.
and to be asleep no later than 10:30.
Sure.
And then I have like a slow wake up routine. I set my alarm for 5:30 and I kind of let myself lay. I do like a little bit of stretch, just trying to wake the body up. And
Sure.
then I'll actually get out of bed at like 5:45, 6.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. What about for like your sleep quality? So like you talked about with your watch, like have you noticed any trends on nights that you get lower sleep quality versus higher sleep quality? Maybe things that you've done differently during that day? Like what have you noticed from that?
If I work out really hard, I sleep better
Okay. Sure.
consistently.
Sure. Does it have to
Um,
be really hard, or can it be like, sustained effort? Let's say like go for like a 5 mile easy run.
yeah.
Okay.
Um, Yeah, sustained effort too.
Okay.
I would agree with that.
Just training in general then probably, if you're having like a good training session.
Good training session, good
Sure.
sleep.
Yeah.
Um, gosh, honestly, I sleep pretty good.
Sure. That's a good thing. Yeah. Yeah. Some of the other things we talked about, like of course from the brief originally, as well as like just consistently whenever I'm briefing the sleep stuff, is the importance of the temperature piece. And you mentioned
Mm,
like maybe taking a bath before bed.
yep.
That's actually a large driver for cooling your body back down, right? Because if we are in
Mm,
a hot bath or a hot shower before bed, that heats our body up during that, right?
mm-hmm,
During
mm-hmm.
that experience. And then as soon as we get out, our natural core body temperature actually decreases because
Mm,
our core body temperature has put forth less effort, let's say, and so then it can actually cool our body back down directly afterwards, which whenever we see our sleep onset, usually it corresponds with about a 1 degree decrease in core body temperature.
hmm,
And so by taking a hot bath or a hot shower, a lot of times we can actually increase the inertia toward heading to deep sleep, which
okay.
is like when our first sleep stages are like primarily focused on deep sleep, which is really interesting. So it's funny because you mentioned that like non-deliberately you do something that is actually really good for your temperature regulation, which is also really
Nice.
good for your sleep. So
All part of the
just so you know,
plan.
yeah, just so you know. Another piece for the temperatures is keeping it right around that like 65 to 68 degrees in the middle of the night. So maybe you do that already, but it's a little easier in Colorado, of course. But
Yeah, true.
okay, so that's kind of the recovery piece. Then when we think about how like both of those things tie into the nutrition piece, do
Hmm.
you do anything specific for nutrition, or like sort of like how do you manage eating healthy for nutrition?
Yeah. So for me,
Sure.
for our household,
Yep.
it's all about preparation
Okay.
because we do what's easy, especially when the week gets busy and we're just like running around and you're hungry. You don't necessarily want to make a huge mess, every single day
Yeah.
cooking. Also for breakfast, I love breakfast. I'm a
Sure.
huge breakfast fan.
Sure.
So but I don't want to wake up and cook breakfast every morning.
Okay.
So um, preparing in advance. I think when people say meal prep, it kind of turns me off because it just sounds like you're like counting calories and like you have all the specific things and it has to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's just me and my wrong
Not at all.
associations.
No.
But for me, it's just about basically making a bunch of food and having a bunch of leftovers so that in the week when I get busy, like, oh, I already have like scrambled eggs made for the next 3 days. So
Sure.
I'm set. I can have a nice meal and I don't
Yep.
have to make stress or work for myself when I
Okay.
get home.
Sure. Makes sense. How do you manage, eating healthy foods? Like while you're on, let's say, like on shift during the day. Throughout the day. Like, do you bring a lunch with you every day? Do you have like meal preps for like all 3 meals throughout the day? Like, do you have protein bars as available snacks? Do you have protein shakes? Like, what else do you do to like kind of manage that throughout the day?
Yeah, I always bring my lunch.
Sure.
When I was on shift, I would bring my lunch and my dinner
Okay.
or whatever meal it was and have snacks. I like RX bars,
Sure.
so I would just go to Costco when they're on sale and
Sure.
just go crazy,
Yeah.
buy all the RX bars.
Yeah.
Um, Protein, I really only do protein shakes after I work out.
Sure.
And most breakfasts, I just do like little egg bites in a little muffin tin, and
Sure.
those last for days.
Yeah.
I love salad for lunch. It's really easy. And like
Yeah.
rotisserie chicken. I don't know how specific we're trying to get here.
No. Yeah. I mean, it's totally up to you. Yeah. I
But
mean, I think what's awesome, and the reason why I even ask you these questions is because it's like, if you have pieces of advice, or not even advice, but like things that you found that work really well for you,
yeah.
maybe then that gives someone else an idea for how they might manage their own, sort of structure. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Life changing was these egg bites
Okay.
because it's like a muffin tin. All you do is you scramble up eggs, like you throw some veggies and some like maybe lunch meat in there if you're trying to get that in the morning.
Sure.
A little bit of cheese on top, 20 minutes in the oven.
Sure.
And then I have 12 of these egg bites, and I usually have 2 or 3 a
Sure.
day.
Yeah.
So it's just made my breakfast a lot easier. And
Yeah.
then I'm not having like all this carbs and stuff, which I don't really want right at the beginning of the
Sure.
morning.
Okay. I've never heard egg bites being life changing before, but
Life
cool.
changing.
Okay.
Would
Sounds
recommend.
good. Sounds good. All right. Okay. So then, I asked about nutrition deliberately before I started talking about shift work because I think that that's a important piece. You talk about bringing dinner as well on the opportunities or times in your career where you've had to do both. So we talked about recovery piece, we talked about the movement, we talked about the nutrition. Now, how do you manage those three components when you're on shift work? Can you tell us a little bit more about the shift work that you've done? Sort of like how the split schedule has worked. Like, do you do 8-hour shifts, 12-hour shifts? Like, what time of day do you guys usually do your rotations at? How long do you stay on that rotation? Like, describe kind of like what shift work experience you've had, and then we can kind of dig in a little bit like how you manage the shift work.
Sure. So when I started, I was on 12-hour shifts. So it was only 12-hour shifts.
Sure.
And it was like a month of days and then a month of mids, month of days. And then I've also done a little bit of 8 hours too. So you're doing days, swings, mids, and um, same thing, month breakout, which I think is pretty good. Some units I know do like a week of days, a week of swings, a week of mids.
That's not the best.
Yeah, I feel like that's really tough.
It is.
Yeah. So that's my experience with shift work.
Okay.
And then sorry, what was your second question?
Yeah. So then, with that experience of shift work, how do you manage your movement, your nutrition, your recovery when you're going through those different shifts, right? So like, do you do anything differently or more deliberately? Do you sort of ramp up training when you're on normal day shifts? Do you sort of like scale back on training whenever you're on night shift? Like sort of, do you go to like, make sure like you go to specific classes or you still have like, a set schedule? Like, how do you manage that type of stuff?
Yeah, so on my off days, I basically keep it the same, like with my CrossFit classes.
Sure.
And then when I was on shift, I couldn't make it to any of the CrossFit classes just because it was outside my hours.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a gym, inside our facility, and
Yep.
whenever I can get time, and it's different for some shift workers who are unable to leave at all. But
Sure.
I was able to leave on occasion, even
Right.
if I could just go run on the treadmill for 25 minutes and then I'd
Yeah.
have to go straight back. I would try and make an effort to do that. Walking too during the day.
Yeah.
When I was on shift, I would actually do a lot of standing and stretching, like yoga.
Sure.
You're just in one place a lot.
Yeah.
So, if you're in one place a lot and you're just standing in a lunge, then it becomes a little more difficult. People might make fun of you, but
sure. Yeah. Yeah. Do you have you ever like thought about like bringing a yoga mat into, the office or like, into the skiff or something like that, then you can like be even more deliberate with something like that, and then actually have like the sort of like the full equipment. And then do you go through any like specific routines? Like you sort of like have one memorized or maybe write it down, or like how do you lead yourself through something like that? Like while you're in, on shift?
Yeah. Yeah, I wish I could say that I was more like, I'd say like, okay, everybody, I'm doing yoga right now.
Sure.
But it's really not that way. I think that because you're on the floor with other people, right? Like you don't want to be weird.
Sure.
And just like, everyone, I'm doing yoga right now.
Sure.
Leave me alone.
Yeah.
So it's more like, you're kind of chatting with other people and then you just kind of become the person who's always, in a yoga pose.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's less so what I was talking about with like the meditation, because I'm not like sitting there and loudly breathing on the floor, disturbing my neighbors.
Sure. That might be a bit much. Sure.
But yeah, it's really just about like the movement piece. Just making sure like, hey body,
Yeah.
you're still awake.
Yeah. Right. How do you go through the nutrition piece then for, let's say, like, working in the middle of the night? Do you sort of still have like 3 meals and you kind of spread it out throughout the night? Like, is it weird to eat at 1 in the morning? Like, what if you don't have an appetite? Like, what do you do for that kind of stuff?
No, it wasn't weird for me to eat at 1 o'clock in the morning. I think that's because you kind of have to make sure that you're sleeping during the day, because if you're not sleeping during the day, then it would not feel like lunch or breakfast or whatever meal that is for you. But I was always hungry, just like I would be on a normal day shift. And then it was the same thing as preparation, because when you get home at 7 o'clock in the morning, the following morning, it's not like you're like, oh yeah, like it's time to cook now.
Right.
So it's really about just using those off days to set yourself up for success.
For sure.
So when you don't set yourself up for success, then you're kind of forced to use the squadron booster club, snack bar.
Right.
And, I think they try and put healthy options there, but you're just not able to be as deliberate with what you're eating.
Right. That makes sense. Okay. You talked a little bit then about like getting home at 7 in the morning. How do you manage sleeping with quality when you get home at 7 in the morning? Like, is there any, did you get blackout curtains? Did you get like a face mask? Like, what did you do to manage your sleep whenever you're sleeping at 7 in the morning?
Definitely, I think blackout curtains are a must
Okay.
for shift workers. I've also heard aluminum foil works well.
Okay.
Haven't tried that one myself.
Sure. That's a
Um,
new one, actually. I've never heard that
yeah,
before. Yeah, I like it.
yeah,
Yeah, that's the ghetto blackout curtain. I
it
like it.
it works.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Um, it wasn't an issue for me usually falling asleep. I know some people, like if you have your families at home, it can be kind of loud,
Sure.
which I can imagine being very difficult.
Sure.
So, just maybe a noisemaker or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. A lot of people do find success with, like, playing music, or even just putting in like 50-cent earbuds that you take to like a
Mhm.
shooting range. Just like
Yeah.
go put those in your ears. Like, it's not that, uncomfortable, especially once
Mhm.
you get used to it. Like, but it can really like save you a lot of high quality sleep.
For sure.
One of the things I was talking about recently with somebody is that they have aircraft fly overhead relatively frequently.
Mm.
And like we did that night. I literally, like, I went to the store for him that day, and I had like a spare pair of ear pro or whatever. And I literally gave him a pair of ear pro that were like brand new. And he went home that night and literally was like, dude, slept through the night for the first time in like 2 weeks. And I was like, that's incredible.
That's
Like, awesome.
awesome.
I'm happy for you, but that, even something as small as that can really make a massive difference. So that's good. That's
You're out
good.
here changing people's lives.
We're trying to. We're certainly trying to. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Okay. Is there anything you want to note further about any of the shift work stuff before we talk about the other components?
It's tough, and um, I just think it's never going to be perfect. Like I'm saying all these things, like yeah, I'm usually hungry and I can usually sleep, but
Yeah.
it's everyone who does it, it sucks. So
Yeah. For
yeah.
sure. That makes sense. Okay. So we've talked about the components of the move, the eat, right, the nutrition piece, and the recovery piece. We still have like the self-talk aspect and then the social connection aspect. So we'll dig into the self-talk aspect next. So do you have anything that you'd like to, say with like sort of what sort of shape like that voice in your head? Like, do you ever have any like internal battles with that voice in your head? What do you think it means to like have that voice in your head, and what sort of relationship do you have with that voice in your head, if you will?
Hmm. Great questions. I think everybody has that voice in their head, but that you have
I
to
hope
kind
so.
of
I do too.
recognize that that voice in your head is you,
Sure.
or at least a version of yourself. So I love writing. Like I do a form of journaling. I've also been training to become a coach, which is just, we think like executive coach, right? And it's about asking yourself powerful questions and finding clarity in your voice,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that is, or your multiple voices.
Sure.
So I think for me, it's about acknowledging whatever it is, right? Like, because that's there for a reason. You don't have to say, like, oh, like whatever that voice is, like, stop, or like, I just shouldn't listen to that voice, right? That
Yeah.
voice is coming up for a reason, but why?
Mm-hmm.
And the clarity behind, like, what are you moving toward, and what is this voice doing for you or expressing about your feelings toward what you're moving toward, these
Sure.
goals.
Yeah.
So for me, journaling and like writing out my thoughts helps me find clarity in what that is, because if you're just kind of like in your brain, it
Mm-hmm.
can get kind of jumbled up. I don't know, I don't have any clarity on why this is coming up. When you write down the actual thoughts, it's like, what that sounds like
Right.
is, oh, maybe the little imposter syndrome. Well,
Mm-hmm.
why are you feeling this way? Or you can kind of start to thinking about it a little bit more rationally, as a
Sure.
centered and grounded version of yourself that's taking in multiple thoughts and ideas about a very complicated life that we live
Sure.
in.
Yeah. Do you have like a set prompt, or is this just like, sort of free form writing?
100% free form.
Okay. Yeah. Are there any like sort of thoughts that get you going on something like that like you have consistently, like, oh, I really want to try to touch on, these specific topics?
I think that the difficulty, and this is just for anyone that's listening, is you literally just have to start writing the first sentence. Like
Sure.
when you start saying, like, I'm going to do like this exercise, and I'm going to try to accomplish these things, or I'm going to start trying to put a name to these voices. There's a billion exercises that
Sure.
people can do. But literally just writing down and being like, oh man, like I don't like writing,
Sure.
but like I'm feeling this way. And then literally that first sentence, maybe you only write one sentence.
Sure.
It's just about starting putting pen to paper for
Yeah.
me, not
Yeah.
about the exercise.
That makes sense. Yeah. What have you ever done that on, a phone or a computer at all? Like, have you noticed any differences there?
I have noticed differences.
Okay,
I really only find that clarity of mind pen to paper.
sure.
Technology, there's like distractions, and I just feel like it's a less authentic version of my thoughts for some
Okay,
reason. I
sure.
don't know. Maybe
Yeah,
works for other people.
yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting. There's certainly some research literature on that, but I mean, the whole point is just talk about like what works best for you,
Yep.
and what I'm familiar with, at least personally, is that technically is usually where people find the most authentic versions, like of their actual thoughts and like what's the truest forms, is that pen to paper aspect. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so that totally makes sense. Okay, then what sort of drives you to we think about like this behavior. We talked a lot about behavior change, right? Like lifestyle factors, right? So when we think about like how do you? It sounds like you really identify sort of as a CrossFitter, right? You sort of identify like as a yogi, right?
Mm-hmm.
How have you shaped those beliefs about yourself to then like kind of how does that mold like how you process your daily life, like whenever you go through like challenges or adversity at work, like does your identity as a CrossFitter, does your identity as a yogi, like how does that influence your daily experience?
That is a profound question.
Cool.
Gosh. Well, I think as a yogi, being able to bring meditation into my daily life, and usually, I mean, you're a huge proponent of this. Sometimes it's only one breath,
Yep.
just being in a meeting and just taking one breath. And also recognizing people for who they are and what they're trying to do, and also recognizing them just as people, not necessarily as like this coworker that you're having whatever with,
Mm-hmm.
that you're trying to have these meetings, or you have some solution you're trying to work toward. um like, because work is hard,
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
and meetings are difficult. So understanding people and meeting people where they're at, meeting yourself where you're at. um Sometimes for me it's just taking a deep breath, like before I walk into offices. Usually I'm like, okay, I got
Yeah.
this, and then I open the door.
Right.
um so I'd say yogi there. I can definitely be better though.
Sure.
Like, I would love to see more elements of my yoga practice and yoga thought process be integrated with the self that I bring to work.
Sure.
um and that's the journey, right?
Yeah,
i
of
gotta
course.
get i gotta get better at that.
Sure.
CrossFit, I just associate with being strong.
Sure.
Obviously, like, strong, tough. And I think especially too, I love that it's become more popular for women to be strong.
Sure.
Like, it's okay for women to have big biceps these days.
Sure.
Maybe before people like be kind of scared of that,
Right.
but now that it's like, yeah, like I'm tough, like I'm strong.
Yeah.
I can lift heavy stuff.
Right.
So I can come in and I can also say what I think about this meeting or
Sure.
whatever, because I'm strong.
That makes sense.
So I think that's where that CrossFit piece comes in. I think they kind of need each other, my CrossFit and my yogi.
Yeah.
That's kind of complementary now that
Yeah.
I talk out loud.
Yeah, good, good. So when we think about that too, like sort of having these different, like sort of separate identities, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
you see yourself sort of as a CrossFitter, right? As an athlete, let's just say, and then you see yourself as, lieutenant, as a
Mm-hmm.
leader in the Space Force, as a military soldier, right? Or as a guardian, right? How do you think, is it important that you have identities outside of sort of your work self? Have you found that there's like any benefit to experiencing other aspects or exploring other hobbies or like things outside of just your work life? Do you find that that's like really beneficial for maybe your mental health or your physical health, or your relationships, or has it influenced you as a leader to maybe push yourself through like tough physical challenges? Like, how have you seen sort of these other identities play a role in developing you as a total human?
Mm, yeah. It's like our Delta commander, we have a Delta run, and every time we have the run, he says, I'm doing this so that you can be uncomfortable, so that you can push your boundaries.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a microcosm of life, right? When we're in our units, we're trying to push boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So I think accomplishing hard things in one realm shows you that you are able to accomplish hard things in the other realms. I also think it's important for people to have hobbies, lives, and identities outside of work. And similarly, when you go home from work, that you're not bringing that work. at the same time, I think it's important that people are bringing their most true selves to work. So,
Mm-hmm.
I just went to my first pottery lesson the other
Sure.
weekend, right? And I feel like the person and the hobbies that I pursue, and right, like yoga, right? I that I bring that to work, that I'm not afraid to make sure that that's a part of my work self,
Yeah.
is equally as important as just doing it outside work.
Mm-hmm. That ties in really well with that social connection piece, right? And I think that ties in well to talking about leadership. And just like the last, component we'll really talk about here is like, how do you think that then that, is that sort of driven by culture? Is that driven by a leader that like makes you feel comfortable bringing your authentic self to work? Like, what if, maybe the culture you're currently at maybe doesn't feel accepting towards something like that? Or like, how would you ever even find that out? Like, what do you think social connection wise, right? Like, how does leadership influence that?
Yeah. I do think it's a culture thing
Mm-hmm.
of whether you feel comfortable to bring your full self to work. I think everybody wants to bring their full self to
Sure.
work. If I came to work and I was like, yes, yogi, meditation, people would be like, ooh,
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know what she's doing over there, but
Sure.
some hippie yoga stuff. Um, and a part of that is courage on the individual, right? You kind of have to meet the community and the organization halfway.
Mm-hmm.
The culture be willing to kind of know you and your full self,
Mm-hmm.
and then you willing to be courageous enough to say like, I am different sometimes in that, I do yoga or I do CrossFit or I love taekwondo and whatever. So courage on part of the individual, and um, you know it's a courageous culture to
Sure.
be able to accept people for their
Yeah.
full selves.
Tying this then back into sort of what you talked about first with why you chose space, it being like a new organization that you could be a leader within. How has that panned out for you? Like, what have you learned so far? In how many years have you been active duty now?
3,
Okay, so what have you learned in the last 3 years then?
building culture is way harder than it sounds.
Sure.
Way
Yeah.
harder. And it's very easy for us to say those words. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we want to build a culture, we want to build a culture where people feel that they can be courageous and that they can be their best selves.
Mm-hmm.
um, and executing that culture at all levels is extremely difficult. It's even harder to know what to do, right? Because I think if we knew what to do, we'd be like, do this,
Right.
and we'd be like, yeah, we got it. But understanding the organization as a whole and how to build culture in any organization is the little things.
Right.
It's everything that's in between. So
Mm-hmm.
no one person has control over it, and nobody really knows, right, how to deliberately change a culture
Mm-hmm.
from the
Is
top to
is
the
there
bottom.
one thing maybe that you think you've done maybe as effectively as a leader yourself? What have you done maybe that's like, that one thing that has really changed your culture in your unit for the better?
Yeah, so I'm in charge. I'm responsible for bringing people in from other units into our Delta.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a huge role in shaping that culture.
Sure.
From the moment that we reach out to people, I want them to know that we care for them and that their family is our family.
Sure.
And I think that once people know that, everything else will fall into place. You just have to feel that you are valued by your organization.
Awesome. Yeah.
That's my perspective, and that's my kind of my motto in our flight.
Sure. Yeah. There's the somewhat famous quote from Teddy Roosevelt, I believe, that says, "Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care." So you could be the
Mm,
best, instructor in your current squadron that anybody's ever seen, but if they don't actually, if the individuals you're, charged with leading don't actually believe that you actually care about them as humans, like they're probably not going to really care that much about what you have to say.
100%.
Yeah.
And it builds that trust. I think maybe too that's comes with building culture. If you
Sure.
don't have that trust, why would I bring my full self to
Sure.
work and say I am a yogi? I don't trust that, you're not going to laugh in my face.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
Have you seen anything from the sort of flip side of that then? Then like one thing that, any unit you maybe even been a part of, maybe that was, sport you did in high school or something Air Force Academy or some different squadrons, whatever, like have you seen any ineffective leadership strategies that have not necessarily gone very well? And then what were those, and were they ever overcome, or were they just something that still permeated the entire time you were there?
This is a very difficult question. Um, I think that, oh man, I think that there are definitely less effective leadership strategies
Sure.
in place, probably in all organizations. Um, it can have a toll on the organization. But I will say that it's rare that all levels of leadership are failing. So, it's on our NCOs, our CGOs, um, or right, like our senior leaders. We're all kind of looking out for whoever is directly around us.
Hmm.
It's kind of an abstraction, but I hope that answered your
Sure.
question.
I mean, yeah, I think it's just sort of important to note, like, if there are any common characteristics that you've seen of ineffective leaders, because then maybe that's something that like an individual can avoid if they're ever in that leadership position, right? Like as I'm sure you went through in your officer training at Air Force Academy, I went through my own officer training back in the Army, right? Sort of we have to study toxic leadership. We have to study, ineffective leadership strategies or study the most effective leadership strategies. But a lot of times that can be case studies on ineffective leaders,
Hmm.
right? And so it's like when we identify things, also not just what does work, because maybe that like boxes us into a hole. If we can say relatively confidently that something specifically doesn't work, or maybe how we interact with somebody in a specific way doesn't work, then someone can avoid doing that thing, which then
Hmm.
also makes them hopefully steer in the direction of doing something else. But that's kind of the important part there.
Yeah. I mean, one thing, so one of our values in Space Force is commitment.
Hmm.
It's my favorite. Everybody has a different one.
Sure.
And I think when a member is not committed to their troops, to whoever is reporting to them, or even like your peers laterally, I think that that's when people in an organization start to become less invested, and they don't feel that the organization as a whole values them because their everyday experience is that those people aren't caring for you. So what I think would be a great thing to change or to avoid, is direct supervisors just really getting to know their people, right? Your family is my family. I'm here to
Hmm.
support you. I'm here to mentor you and watch you grow and help you reach what your goals are. What are your goals, right? Asking that question. What are your goals? So just commitment. Like, things not to do is to just be like, like we're the Space Force. We're a
Sure.
highly technical force, so we don't really do that. So
Yeah.
good luck. Hope you have a good time here in the Space Force.
Sure.
We really got to just care. That's the bottom line.
Makes sense. Okay. Cool. So that about does it for the five factors of health piece, right? I'll just finish off with one last question then. Are there any of your favorite resources? You mentioned like one specific YouTube channel that you enjoy, right? You mentioned a book.
Yep.
Do you have any other further resources, that you'd steer people toward, things that like maybe just resonate with you? It doesn't have to be a blanket statement that this is going to be great for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
but if anybody has resonated with anything you've said so far, like, are there any other resources that you listen to on a consistent basis, or you read, or like how do you find those other opportunities, and what have you found to be effective for you?
Sure. So I mentioned the 5 a.m. Club,
Mm-hmm.
by Robin Sharma. That's a really good book. It's basically about setting up this power hour at the beginning of your day,
Mm-hmm.
20 minutes of exercise, 20 minutes of meditation, and 20 minutes of whatever that one thing is that would completely change your life that you're just
Sure.
not making time for.
Sure.
There's a bunch of other nuggets in there as well. Yoga with Adriene is my favorite yoga YouTube channel.
Sure.
For my folks at SPD1, CrossFit Bonnie and Clyde,
Okay.
awesome, full of military folks.
Sure.
I'm switching over to Railstop Fitness now,
Okay.
over in Payton. Um, but that's pretty much it. Everybody's got their own journey.
Sure. Are there any podcasts you listen to, or are there any like like any other favorite books? Do you listen to Audible, or like what else?
I do listen to Audible.
Sure.
None of the books that I've been listening to are like super fitness related.
That's fine. It doesn't have to be. Yeah.
um, gosh, Seven Habits is a book that I think that everyone, 7 Habits of Highly
Yep.
Effective People. I try and read that one annually just because I think it's so good and I pull something out of it different every time.
Sure.
Um, trying to think here. I go to Cambio Yoga, but most studios around here are pretty awesome.
Sure.
I think that's all I've got.
Okay. Cool. Do you have anything else you want to say?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity
Yeah.
and thank you for helping people out and changing our perception of fitness and
We're trying to do.
holistic health. I love that it's focused on the whole person.
Yeah.
And I really see you helping people out. So thank
Thanks.
you.
Appreciate it. Awesome.